Welcome to the Sun River Anglers Fly Tying Corner. This month's pattern is the Crystal Beach Persuasion. It's a fly born out of necessity when our trip to Christmas Island was extended unexpectedly. Our plane was canceled and we ended up spending 5 additional days on this beautiful island. What was one to do but sit on the beach and drink beer and keep fishing? It was a great trip. Christmas Island should definitely be on your bucket list. We caught multiple species, saw amazing bird life, and just had a great time. But I digress. Back to the Crystal Beach Persuasion. The materials we're going to need for this fly: for a hook, I used a Mustad 3908C. This is a very old hook, and I think most folks would recommend a TMC 811S currently. I used 70 denier orange thread. I used brass hourglass eyes in 3/32, but depending on the depth that you're fishing, you might want to go with bead chain or hourglass eyes in a larger size. For the tail, I used Crystal Flash UV Tan, an important part of this fly. The legs are Grizzly Micro Legs. The body is Pearlescent Polar Flash. The wing is comprised of Pearlescent Polar Flash and Tan Craft Fur. So those are the materials you'll need for this pattern. So let's get started tying this fly. I'm going to attach my thread right toward the front of the hook. And trim off the excess. Then I'm going to wrap forward right toward the front of the eye and wind back slightly and build a little bump on the hook. This is to seat the eyes against. And it also reserves a portion of the front of the hook for the head of the fly so I can tie in the underside, etc. So I'm going to figure eight the eyes. In this case I've used 3/32 hourglass brass eyes to add some weight to this fly. And now I've clipped off some UV Tan Crystal Flash, and I'm going to attach that right behind the eyes, wind back to the tail set position, and take one wrap underneath to set the tail in place and clip off the excess. Next, I've taken 2 strands of my Grizzly Micro Silly Legs, and I'll wrap those around the thread and just attach them to the hook right behind the eye. And then I'll grab 2 on either side and tie those down back to the tail set of the hook. And clip off the excess. Clip these off nice and long. They're probably 1.5 inches beyond the tail of the fly, or beyond the hook. I like those longer legs because they add some action and some life to the pattern. Next, I'm going to take my Pearlescent Polar Flash. It's got some little pinky and orange hues to it, and I just really like the way it looks on the hook. And I'll tie that in across the body of the fly, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of Sally Hansen's on the body to tie this into and make sure that it doesn't shred as it's being fished. And I'll take this Pearlescent Polar Flash and wind it forward on the hook up to just behind the eyes. Then I'll cross my thread and bring that forward all the way up to the very eye of the hook. And I'll tie that off with just a couple of wraps. Now I'm going to take and flip my fly over so I can tie on the bottom side of the hook. And I'll take that polar flash and I'll bend it backwards. And I'm going to tie that very tightly against the eye of the hook, or the eyes on the hook, and then I'll clip off the excess. Just probably about the length of the crystal flash, maybe a touch shorter. And the last step is to take some tan craft fur, and I'm going to even up the tips and tie this in right on top of the polar flash. Let me spend a moment kind of evening up the tips so I get a nice clump of this UV craft fur. So I've evened up the tips. I'm going to clip this off, pre-cut it, so that the butts don't get tangled up in the eye of the hook. And then I'll bring it up and capture it with just a couple of wraps of thread, soft wraps, and then I'll pull the butts away from the eye of the hook. And I'm going to wind this tightly against the eyes of the fly. And then I'll wind over all those butts right at the head. And I'll drop right into a whip finish for this pattern. I might clean up the back end of that just slightly. And now I will again use my Sally Hansen's over the head of this fly, and I'm going to coat the top of the eyes and make sure all that thread is sealed. Might do a little pruning and a little cleanup. So there you have it, the Crystal Beach Persuasion. This pattern was just dynamite down on Christmas Island a few weeks back. We caught a lot of bonefish and smaller trevally. We caught puffer fish. We caught ladyfish. We caught triggerfish and others. So that's the Sun River Anglers fly tying corner for this month. Thanks for listening.